She's a hoarder. Burn the attic junk. That's what my husband told the insurance appraiser, loud enough for my 4-year-old daughter to hear from the stairs. I was standing in the kitchen of our house in Savannah, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. The appraiser, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Ainsworth with tired eyes and a clipboard, glanced at me. He'd been sent out because a storm had cracked the attic dormer 2 weeks earlier. Rain had gotten in. Policy said someone had to itemize what was damaged. My husband, Dorsey, didn't want him up there. Dorsey wanted the whole attic tossed to the curb, written off, done. He kept saying it was garbage, old boxes, junk from my dead grandmother. He was smiling the whole time. His smile was the kind of smile you give a waiter when you're about to complain about the soup. Mr. Ainsworth climbed the attic ladder anyway. That was his job. 15 minutes later, he came down holding a battered cookie tin. He set it on my kitchen counter. He didn't open it. He just looked at me and said, "Ma'am, this was taped under the 3rd floorboard from the window. Do you want me to log it with the household items or with you personally?" Dorsey's face did something I'd never seen it do. It went still. All the charm drained out of it like somebody pulled a plug. I said, "With me personally." Mr. Ainsworth nodded, wrote something on his clipboard, and left. Dorsey waited until the door closed, then he walked over, slow, and his hand came up and his fingers wrapped around my wrist so hard I felt the bone. "Open it," he whispered. I opened it. Inside that cookie tin, wrapped in a piece of my grandmother's handwriting, was $51,800 in cash, old bills, 20s and 50s, and a folded note that said, "For Marigold, when he shows you who he is." My grandmother had been dead 3 years. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known. Dorsey's fingers tightened on my wrist. I'm telling you this story because 11 months later, I sat in a Chatham County family courtroom and watched a judge revoke every custody right he had. But to understand how a cookie tin and a broken dormer became the thing that ended him, you need to know who he was before that afternoon. And who I'd quietly become. My name is Marigold Easton. I was 29 years old in the fall of 2019, living in a narrow Victorian on East Jones Street that we couldn't really afford, but that Dorsey said looked right for our family. I had one daughter, Posey, who was 4, and a habit I'd had since childhood of not throwing things away. Receipts, birthday cards, voicemails. My mother used to tease me about it. My grandmother never did. My grandmother said, "Marigold, the people who keep the paper win the war." That was her line. She said it to me maybe 50 times growing up. The people who keep the paper win the war. It wasn't a saying I'd ever heard anywhere else. It was just hers. And she said it when she was peeling potatoes or pulling out a utility bill from 1974 to prove somebody wrong about something that had happened at church. She kept file folders in her pantry right there between the flour and the rice, as if paperwork were a staple. Maybe for her it was. I worked as a fraud investigator for a regional bank, which sounds more impressive than it is. Mostly I spent my days on the phone with elderly people who'd been conned out of their Social Security by a man claiming to be their grandson. I'd listen, I'd take notes, I'd fill out forms. It was a quiet job and it suited me. I'm not a loud person. I've never been a loud person. I'm the kind of person who notices the second cup at a one-person dinner table. That's always been my thing, I notice. I met Dorsey Calder in the spring of 2013 at a friend's wedding in Tybee Island. He was tall, he was charming, he had a laugh that carried across a room without being loud, and he told me on our second date that his mother used to say he was born with a broken compass. And I was the first person who pointed him north, which, looking back, was the red flag. It wasn't a flag, it was a whole parade. A man who tells you on date 2 that you're responsible for his moral direction is not flirting. He's assigning homework. I married him anyway in 2015 because I was 25 and he was handsome and my grandmother had just had her first stroke and I wanted her at the wedding. She came. She sat in her wheelchair in the front row. Halfway through the reception, she gripped my forearm and said, "Marigold, keep the paper." I thought she meant the marriage license. I said, "Of course, Nana." She squeezed harder. She said it again, "Keep the paper." I told her I would. I had no idea what she was preparing me for. The first 2 years with Dorsey were good, or they were, in the way a locked room can feel safe until you realize it's locked. He was thoughtful. He left me notes. He remembered the cinnamon toast my mother used to make me when I was sick, and he'd make it himself. Exactly that way, whenever I had a cold. The smell of it would fill the kitchen. butter blistering on the pan, cinnamon going dark at the edges, a faint sweetness that stuck to the curtains for a whole day afterward. He worked in commercial real estate, did well at it, and made enough that when Posey was born in 2015, we could afford for me to drop to part-time. The first time he hit me, Posey was 3 months old. I remember this because I had just come back from her pediatrician appointment. She'd gotten her vaccines. She'd cried all afternoon. I'd cried too. I was exhausted in a way I hadn't known was possible. Dorsey came home late. I'd forgotten to defrost chicken. He looked at the counter where the chicken was supposed to be, looked at me holding our screaming daughter, and backhanded me across the mouth. Not hard, not the kind of hit that leaves a mark, just hard enough to say, "This is a thing I do now." He apologized for 6 straight days, flowers, a silver bracelet, a handwritten letter. He said his father used to hit his mother, and he was terrified he'd become that, and I was the only person who could make sure he didn't. He cried. I cried. I believed him because I was 25 and tired, and he was good at it. I kept that letter. I put it in a shoebox under the bed. It was the first piece of paper. By the time Posey was 2, there were 43 pieces of paper in that shoebox. Bruised chronologies I'd written to myself, receipts from an urgent care in Pooler I'd driven to with a cracked rib, a photograph of my jaw after the Thanksgiving he'd pushed me into the dishwasher for burning the rolls. I didn't know what I was building. I just kept building it. The people who keep the paper win the war. Nana. In March 2019, Nana died. The funeral was small. My mother was a mess. I was the one who cleaned out Nana's apartment alone because my mother couldn't bear to. Her apartment still smelled like her. Bay leaves and Pond's cold cream and the faint mineral smell of the old radiator she'd fed pennies into since the Carter administration. The linoleum in her kitchen was the yellow of a bruise 6 days old. Her refrigerator hummed at a pitch I remembered from being 7 years old. And standing on a step stool reaching for the cookie jar. I found the tin then. I remember opening it, seeing the bills and the note, reading the note, and sitting down on the linoleum floor of Nana's kitchen and laughing so hard I thought I was having a stroke myself. She'd known. For years, she'd known. She'd watched me show up to Sunday dinner with makeup too thick around one eye, and she'd said nothing and done this instead. She'd prepared me an exit. I didn't take the money home. Not at first. I didn't trust myself with it. If Dorsey found it, he'd take it. If I spent it, it would be gone. So I did the thing Nana would have done. I hid it in our house, in the one place Dorsey never went. The attic? Under the 3rd floorboard from the dormer window. I told myself I'd know when to use it. The attic smelled like cedar and dry heat and the faint powder of old insulation, and every time I climbed up there, I'd crouch on the plywood and listen for the sound of Dorsey's tires in the driveway. The house had a sound when he came home. The gate latch clicked twice, then his boots on the porch, then a beat, him checking the mailbox, and then the front door. I'd learned the whole sequence by heart. It gave me 22 seconds. That was April 2019. In July, I bought a camera. You should know something about me. When Dorsey hit me, I never called the police. Not once. You're going to ask why. The honest answer is that the first time I thought about it, he was holding Posey on his lap on the couch reading her a book. And I thought, if I call them and they take him away, she'll never forgive me. She was 3. She adored him. He was, to her, the father who read books and made cinnamon toast. The bruises were on parts of me I could cover. But in July 2019, something changed. He hit Posey. Not hard? He'd tell you, not hard. He slapped her hand at the dinner table because she'd reached for the salt without asking. The sound of it is the thing I still hear. That small, wet sound of an adult palm on a 4-year-old's hand. She looked at him like he was a stranger. Then she looked at me, and in that look I saw my own 25-year-old face, confused, trying to decide whether this was love. I bought the camera the next day. It was a small wireless thing, the kind people use to watch their dogs when they're at work. I hid it on the top of the bookshelf in the living room, pointed at the couch where he mostly sat. It recorded to a memory card. I had to climb up every Sunday morning while he was at his mother's and swap cards and move the footage to a laptop I kept in my desk drawer at work. I did this for 137 days. I want to be honest. I was not a mastermind. I was scared most of the time. I was throwing up in the work bathroom twice a week. The fluorescent light in that bathroom buzzed like a wasp trapped in a jar, and the soap smelled like a hospital. I'd rinse my mouth, stare at myself, and practice my face. There were nights I watched the footage back at my desk at the bank, Headphones in, and I'd watch him do something to me that I couldn't remember clearly from the inside, and I'd realize I had started somewhere along the line to let my brain delete things in real time as a survival mechanism. The camera didn't delete, the camera kept the paper. The attic storm hit the last week of October. A pecan branch came down through the dormer. Rain. Insulation ruined. Dorsey told the claim adjuster on the phone that the attic contents were junk, write it all off. Mr. Ainsworth showed up on a Tuesday morning anyway because policy. Dorsey didn't know Mr. Ainsworth was coming. He'd meant to be there. He'd been pulled into a meeting. He'd called me, furious, told me to send the appraiser away and have him reschedule. I said, "Of course, honey." I hung up. I let Mr. Ainsworth in. I did not tell Mr. Ainsworth where to look. I want you to know that. I hadn't moved the tin in 7 months. I'd almost forgotten which board it was under. Mr. Ainsworth found it because he was thorough and because a floorboard near the water damage had warped. He pulled it up to document whether the joist beneath was rotted. The tin was sitting there in plain sight like it had been waiting. When Dorsey came home and heard, he did 3 things in order. He squeezed my wrist until it bruised. He demanded the tin, and he said, "If you take $1 of that out of this house, I'll tell the court you're unstable and you'll never see Posey again." I handed him the tin. I kept the note. That was the night I started actually planning, not surviving. Planning. There's a difference. Survival is what you do when the only thing ahead of you is the next hour. Planning is what you do when you can suddenly see a Thursday in February where things might be different. The night Dorsey took the tin, I saw a Thursday. I didn't know the exact date, but I saw it. The next morning, I called my cousin Imara. Imara and I had grown up 3 streets apart in Savannah. She was a paralegal at a small family law firm downtown, a woman with a voice like gravel and the least patience for bad men of anyone I'd ever met. I'd been hiding what Dorsey was from her for 6 years. I told her everything in one phone call, sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Publix. It took 47 minutes. When I was done, she said, "Marigold, thank God." I said, "I have footage." She said, "How much?" I said, 137 days. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You stubborn, beautiful woman." Imara didn't tell me what to do. She asked me what I wanted. I said, "I want my daughter. I want her not to grow up thinking the slapping is normal. I want out of that house." I said, "I don't need the money. He can have the money. He can have the house. He can have everything except her." Imara said, "Then let's build that." We built it over 9 weeks. During those 9 weeks, Dorsey got worse. He could smell that something in me had shifted, the way a dog smells rain. He didn't know what. He just knew. He started checking my phone at night while he thought I was asleep. I'd lie still and listen to my own breathing and try to make it sound like a person who had nothing to hide, which is harder than you'd think. He started calling my work to see if I'd left for lunch on time. He hit me twice in November, once for leaving a light on, once for no reason he bothered to invent. Both times, the camera was running. He also, in that period, did 2 things he didn't know I knew about. He opened a joint credit card in my name without asking, which I learned about because I am a fraud investigator and I check. He also, on a Friday in early November, drove to a storage unit in Garden City at 2:47 in the afternoon, which I learned about because his truck has a GPS tag in the glove box that I'd put there in August. What was in the storage unit, I didn't know yet. But I kept the receipt of the tag's transmission. Paper. One night near the middle of November, he came home at midnight with whiskey on him. I was on the couch pretending to read. He stood in the doorway and watched me for a long time. Then he said, quiet, almost curious, "You're planning something." I looked up at him. I made my face the face I'd practiced in the bank bathroom. I said, "I'm planning Posey's Christmas dress. Dorsey, do you want to help?" He stared a second longer. Then he laughed, one short bark of a laugh, and went upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close. I sat on the couch until my hands stopped shaking, which took about 40 minutes. The camera on the bookshelf had a tiny green pinpoint of light you couldn't see unless you knew exactly where to look. I looked. It was on. 3 days after that, he did the thing that sealed it. Though I didn't know yet it would be the thing, he came into the kitchen while I was making Posey's lunch, and he took the knife out of my hand. Not violently. He just slid it out of my fingers like a parent taking a toy from a child. He set it on the counter behind him. Then he said, "You know I could hurt you so much worse than I have. You know that, right? I want you to remember I've been merciful." I said, "I know, Dorsey." He said, "Say thank you." I said, "Thank you." said. He handed the knife back. He walked out of the kitchen whistling. The camera in the living room caught the audio through the open doorway, not the picture, just the audio. It was enough. Thanksgiving was the cruelest moment. His mother, Vivian Calder, a woman with a church lady smile and a voice like a butter knife, came to dinner. She had never liked me. I'd known that from the beginning. What I didn't know until that night was how much she'd been coaching him. Halfway through dinner, in front of Posey, in front of my mother, in front of Amara, who I'd insisted we invite, Vivian said, "Marigold, dear, Dorsey tells me you've been forgetting your medication again." Everyone at the table went quiet. I was not on any medication. I had never been on any medication. I looked at Dorsey. Dorsey was smiling that waiter smile. He said, "It's all right, Mom. We're managing it." That was the foundation he'd been laying. He'd been telling his mother, and probably a therapist, and probably a doctor, that I was mentally ill and non-compliant. Setting up the custody case, setting up the story where Posey wasn't safe with me. Imara caught my eye across the table. She gave me one tiny nod. It meant we can work with this. Keep eating. I kept eating. The turkey was dry. I remember this because I remember thinking specifically that Dorsey had wanted me to make it dry, had wanted a reason, and I had given him none, and he had invented one anyway, because the reason had never mattered. After pie, Vivienne followed me into the kitchen. She put her hand on the small of my back, light as a hymn, and said, "Marigold, you know it's all right to accept help. Dorsey just wants you well." I turned the faucet on so the water would cover my voice. I said, "Vivian, I know exactly what Dorsey wants." She tilted her head. She almost smiled. She said, "Sweetheart, you sound tired." I said, "I am tired." Then I handed her a dish towel, and she dried a plate, and we stood there side by side at the sink like two women who loved each other. And the hate between us was so clean, I could have drunk it. The week after Thanksgiving, I did the thing I'd been building toward. I filed, not for divorce first, for an emergency protective order, with Imara's firm representing me, and a motion for temporary sole custody of Posey. I attached a sworn affidavit. I attached medical records from the urgent care in Pooler. I attached photographs. I attached the note in my grandmother's handwriting because the note established that the abuse had been visible to a third party, my grandmother, for years. And I attached a USB drive. The USB drive had 46 clips on it, time-stamped, from 137 days of footage. Imara and her supervising attorney had curated them down. Not every incident. The worst ones. Him hitting me in the kitchen while Posey watched from the doorway. Him grabbing Posey's arm on October 3rd and lifting her off the floor by it. Him in the kitchen doorway, audio only, saying, "You know I could hurt you so much worse than I have." Him on a phone call, in our living room, telling someone I'll say she's bipolar, the doctor will back me up, she'll lose the kid. That was the clip that mattered. That was the clip that turned the lock. The hearing was set for December 19th, 2019. Judge Ilana Rooker presiding. The morning of the hearing, Dorsey didn't know what was coming. He knew I'd filed for a protective order. His lawyer, a man named Bram Whitlow, who billed $400 an hour and golfed with Dorsey's father, had told him not to worry. Judge Rooker was known to be conservative about removing fathers from the home. Bram had advised Dorsey to wear a gray suit, bring his mother, and look sad. Dorsey did all three. Vivian sat behind him in a navy dress with a small gold cross at her throat. Dorsey's father, Ames, sat next to her. They looked like a Christmas card. I sat with Imara and her supervising attorney, a woman named Prudence Oylaren, who was 6 feet tall and did not smile. My mother sat behind me. Posey was not in the courtroom. Posey was with my aunt. I want you to know that. Whatever came next, my daughter did not see. Bram went first. He did what I knew he'd do. He painted me as unstable, forgetful, prone to exaggeration, recently bereaved. He mentioned my grandmother. He used the word fragile. He said my husband had been caring for me patiently for years and had only recently begun to worry about the impact of my behavior on their child. Judge Rooker listened without expression. Then Prudence stood up. She said, "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to enter into evidence Exhibits A through F. Exhibits A through D were medical records and photographs. Exhibit E was the note from my grandmother. Exhibit F was the USB drive." Prudence said, "We have 4 clips we'd like to play, totaling 11 minutes. Judge Rooker said, "Proceed." The bailiff wheeled in a television. It was one of those courtroom carts with the black rubber wheels that squeak. I remember the squeak. I remember thinking, this is what the inside of my life sounds like right now, a squeaky wheel. I didn't watch Dorsey during the first clip. The first clip was him in the kitchen, September 14th. I'd watched that one 11 times by then. I watched his mother instead. Vivian Calder sat very still. At about the 40-second mark, when her son's hand connected with my face on the screen, and the sound of it came through the courtroom speakers, her own hand came up to her mouth. She didn't make a sound, but her eyes changed. The second clip was October 3rd. Him grabbing Posey's arm, Posey crying, me in the background saying, "Please, please, Dorsey, please." His father, Ames, stopped looking at the screen. He looked at his shoes. The third clip was the audio from the kitchen doorway. "I could hurt you so much worse than I have. You know that, right? I want you to remember I've been merciful." Prudence paused the clip. She said, "For the record, Your Honor, this is the voice of the respondent Dorsey Calder 3 weeks ago, in the presence of the minor child." Judge Rooker wrote something down. Bram Whitlow shifted in his seat. I heard his chair creak. The fourth clip was the phone call. "I'll say she's bipolar, the doctor'll back me up, she'll lose the kid." When it ended, the courtroom was quiet for maybe 8 seconds. Those were long seconds. I want to tell you what those 8 seconds were like because the whole story lives in them. I had imagined that moment 100 times. I had rehearsed it in the shower, in the car, in the bank bathroom with the buzzing light. In my imagination, I would feel triumph, a clean, bright thing, a flag going up. What I actually felt was something quieter and older and almost sad. I felt the weight of every single piece of paper I had carried for 6 years lift off my chest at the exact same moment, all at once, and the lifting was so sudden that the place where the weight had been ached. I felt my grandmother's hand on my forearm at the wedding reception. I felt the linoleum of her kitchen under my knees the day I found the tin. I felt Posey's small hand the night she looked at me after he slapped her. The look that had said, "Mama, is this what we do now?" I felt the bank bathroom tile under my forehead the morning I'd thrown up so hard I saw stars. And I felt the keys of the laptop under my fingers at my desk at midnight. Clicking, clicking, labeling files by date. I felt all of it, stacked, and I felt it set down. Not thrown, set down, the way you set down a sleeping child. And underneath the sadness, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in 6 years. Because feeling it would have cost me everything. I felt certainty. The cold, plain certainty that I had been right. That the woman I had quietly become in the dark of that house, hoarding evidence like my grandmother had hoarded utility bills, had been the sane one all along. That the work had not been paranoia. The work had been love. Love for the child upstairs. Love for the woman I used to be. Love, even, for the woman I was going to be on the other side of those 8 seconds, whoever she turned out to be. I breathed in. I breathed out. The 8 seconds ended. Judge Rooker said, "Mr. Whitlow, do you have a response to Exhibit F?" Bram stood up halfway and said, "Your Honor, we'd like to request a continuance to review." Judge Rooker said, "Denied. Sit down." She granted the protective order. She granted temporary sole custody to me. She ordered supervised visitation only 2 hours a week at the Chatham County Family Services Office for Dorsey. She ordered him to surrender his firearms to the Savannah Police Department within 48 hours. She referred the phone call clip and the kitchen doorway audio to the district attorney for review regarding conspiracy to commit perjury, false psychiatric report, and terroristic threat. The whole hearing took 14 minutes. I stood up to leave. Dorsey was still sitting. He looked up at me, and for the first time in 6 years, he looked small. He said, "Marigold, please." I said, "Keep the paper, Dorsey." That's all I said. Then I walked out. In the hallway, Imara squeezed my hand so hard I felt bone. Prudence did not smile, but she did nod, which from her was the same as a brass band. Vivian Calder was standing by the window. She was crying, not the performative kind, the real kind. She tried to reach for me as I passed. She said, "Marigold, I promise you, I kept walking. She was not my responsibility. She had been an adult his whole life, and she had chosen every Sunday dinner where she pretended not to see my face. Here's what happened after. Within 2 weeks, Dorsey's firm quietly moved him to a non-client-facing role. The DA's office did open a file on the phone call clip. Within a month, Bram Whitlow withdrew as his attorney. Within 6 weeks, the Calder family's longtime pastor at their church called Vivian and asked her, kindly, to take a sabbatical from the women's ministry. Within 2 months, Ames Calder filed for divorce from Vivian. That last one I didn't expect. I don't know the whole story there. I suspect the video of his son hitting a 4-year-old had done something to the mythology of the marriage that Ames couldn't unsee. The storage unit in Garden City turned out to contain another woman's belongings. Her name was Keturah. She was 23. She hadn't known Dorsey was married. When Amara, through back channels, got word to her about the hearing, Keturah drove to the courthouse that afternoon and gave a statement. She cried too. I wrote her a letter 6 months later thanking her. She wrote back, "We're not friends exactly, but we exchange Christmas cards." Dorsey tried to contact me 3 times in the first year. Once through email, once through his mother, once through a letter mailed to my work. I read none of them. I gave them to Prudence. They became paper. The $51,800 from the cookie tin, which he'd taken from me that afternoon, he'd deposited in a personal account. Prudence got it back in the divorce settlement, along with the house, which I sold, and most of the furniture, which I gave away. I took Posey and moved into a smaller place on the east side of Savannah, a carriage house with a live oak in the yard and a kitchen the size of a closet. Posey has her own room with a window that faces the tree. She asks about her father sometimes. I answer honestly in the smallest true answers I can find for a 5-year-old. She's 6 now. She's okay. She's more than okay. She laughs in a way she didn't laugh when he was in the house. It's the loudest thing in the carriage house, and I listen for it every day. I kept one thing from the old house. I kept the cookie tin. It's empty now. It sits on my kitchen windowsill. Sometimes in the morning, when the coffee's finally hot and Posey is eating cinnamon toast, which I make the way my mother made it, not the way he made it, I look at that tin and I think about Nana sitting in her wheelchair at my wedding, gripping my forearm. Keep the paper. The people who keep the paper win the war. I kept it, Nana. I kept all of it. And somewhere, I hope she knows.